All right. Good morning, everybody. We're glad to be here this morning at Becknology Days 2025 and having what has been called a conversation. But today we're talking about soybeans. So that's all right, too. Wanted to introduce everybody here with me, or maybe you could just go ahead and introduce yourselves quickly. Matt?
Yeah, so I'm Matt Montgomery, and I work for Beck's as what's called the Agronomy Education Lead. And that's basically a resource for our agronomists and employees and customers. And I also serve as primary agronomist in a small territory that runs 20, 30 miles north, south, east, west of Decatur.
Nice. Yeah. Nice. Stephanie?
My name's Stephanie Porter, and I'm the outreach agronomist for ISA, Illinois Soybean Association, and member of the agronomy team. So 10 females. And we cover all of the state and do outreach via fieldadvisor.org and do all things on-farm trials now, as well as funding a lot of different research with red crown rot, as well as other things. So happy to be here. Thanks.
Nice. Stephanie? Boris?
Hi, I'm Dr. Boris Camilletti. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Crop Sciences at the University of Illinois, and I am the extension plant pathologist for the university.
Nice. Thanks, Boris. I have a good habit of introducing everybody and not myself, so maybe I should do that too. I'm Holly Spengler. I'm the editor of Prairie Farmer magazine and executive editor for Farm Progress. And we're going to talk about red crown rot today. And as I was thinking about this, it occurs to me, I think farmers kind of have three basic questions about any sort of disease, pest, weed. What is it, where is it, and what's it going to cost me? So maybe if we could dive into some of that here today, that basic question, what is red crown rot? Maybe, Matt, you want to start us?
Yeah, so red crown rot, a disease that probably was first detected in the Midwest in 2018, actually by Boris's predecessor, Nathan Kolcheski at University of Illinois. Looks an awful lot like sudden death syndrome. I know we're going to talk about yield losses here in a bit. That's one differentiator. And then we probably can talk just a little bit about, some of the other things that make it a little different than sudden death syndrome. I don't know if you guys want to add any more into that conversation and description of what the disease is.
Yes, it's a soil-borne disease. It's caused by a fungus that is called Callonectria ilicicola. And this fungus can produce some structures that will remain in the soil that are called microsclerotia. And those are the structures that will remain for many years in the soil and will cause infections in the following seasons. So this is a disease that is emerging here in the Midwest, but was very common in the past in the southern U.S. It's not a problem anymore there, so we don't know what happened, just disappeared in Mississippi, Louisiana, and North Carolina. It was also a problem in peanuts, but now disappear, and now we have it here. So one of the questions that we are trying to address is the same pathogen that moved here, or is a new population of the same fungus that we have here in the Midwest?
And I guess I'll add to that. It can be confused with sudden death syndrome, brown stem rot, as well as stem canker, which I've brought up in the past. I've had people call me, go out to the field, and it was stem canker. And I think the other thing to highlight that a lot of people have been talking about lately is they go to the field and they find both sudden death syndrome and red crown rot. So that's very common. That's not anything new. Once that plant kind of starts going down, it starts getting other diseases. And I've seen that in Pike County where it could have up to 3 diseases. So I've seen one plant that had red crown rot, sudden death syndrome, and stem canker.
That's a lot to ask of a plant.
We probably should mention, too, I don't think we mentioned the parathecia yet, those little red structures that kind of make this really unique in the field. You guys know better than I do, but as plant pathologists, we try to be pretty disciplined. You try to be pretty disciplined about send a sample in for ID, still try to do that, but this does have some unique signs of the disease itself, and we probably should mention that before we move on.
And I think I'll add to that. So 2 years ago, we had a bit of a drought, and we were really trying to diagnose it and get it. People wanted to try to find it. We're trying to promote ID of it. and a lot of it was dry, and we weren't seeing those little parathecia, so it was even harder to identify. And I don't know, Boris, if you want to comment on that. Sometimes you see them, and sometimes you don't. Do you think in certain conditions or later into the season you might see those more often?
Yeah. We need the right conditions to see them, and also it's very common that you pull the plant, you see them, you go to your car, and they are gone. So any heavy rainfall can wash them out. But if you pull several plants, you may get a chance to see them. And that is a very characteristic of this disease and can help us to differentiate from sudden death, for example, because the foliar symptoms are identical.
Sure. So if you're a farmer out there trying to figure out what you've got and you haven't been able to get an agronomist out to look at it yet, what are they looking for exactly?
Yeah, so the best way that I can describe it, and this actually came from one of our dealers, and we mentioned this last week when we were all together, is if you're familiar with chiggers, right? You know, the little red mites. Think about something about that size, that color, just not moving around, round like that, all over the root, about an inch and above and below the soil line. And think about the root really degrading very rapidly, and those symptoms that look like sudden death that we talked about.
Yeah.
And at that training, we also talked about, we were unfortunately in my home area, which is a hot spot this year, and unfortunately found it on our own family farm after that training.
Within like 2 days after.
I had to look.
And where is that, Stephanie?
So Nokomis, and then we were also in Christian County as well in Sangamon. Is that correct, Matt?
Yep.
But it's been found in a lot of different counties across the state. I would say, not that say it's not in the South. I'm wondering, I think it's been found a little bit in the South, but a big swath across the middle of the state, up until a little bit north of Bloomington, would you say, Matt? I mean, to try to give you an area of how many counties have been positive in the past. And you can find a map on CPN, Crop Protection Network.
Yes, there is a Red Crown roadmap at the Crop Protection Network where you can see all the counties that have been confirmed to have the disease. We have a new addition, Delaware, Ohio, so that's a new state. So far we have Missouri, Kentucky, Indiana, Illinois, and now Ohio.
So it's heading east. That's what we're saying.
So a lot of times we go out there, we split the stem, make sure it's not brown. That would be brown stem rot. If you split the stem and see dark cankers or large canker, or scrape the outside and see a canker, that's stem canker, obviously. And then SDS, sometimes if you are in moist conditions, can't have some blue fungus on the roots, not always, but it's more of a brown inside when you split the stem.
Absolutely. And then the next question always is, what's it going to cost? Like, how does that affect yield? What sort of, and we didn't really talk about timing, but like at what point does this typically show up?
Yeah, timing-wise, you can begin to see some modeling on the leaves, sometimes that mid-July, late July period. But then I would say the structures that we just talked about, really you're going to start to get into very back into July, beginning of August, and probably prime time is pretty close to where we're at now. You get to that middle part of August, and you really start to see those structures. Yield loss-wise, I know Boris is going to talk a little bit about they're trying to actually put some kind of quantitative numbers on that. I think if you talk to people, and you may be able to speak to this as well, Stephanie, in Pike County, Illinois, that have really experienced it, they'll toss out, and I think rightfully so, that in the real severe cases, 40 to 60% losses. I don't know if you guys want to comment on that.
Yeah, so Dr. Carl Bradley at the University of Kentucky compared these diseased plants with healthy ones, and he found like 70% yield reduction. But this is a very patchy disease. So if we have a 70% reduction comparing the disease area with a healthy area, so at the end, the yield loss will depend on how big these patches are in the field. So as Matt said, we are trying to put a number. We are trying to estimate the yield reduction using satellite imagery or drone imagery. So we are working on that to have a precise number, and also to be able to predict the yield loss and then the economic, as in if it is worthy to apply a seed treatment, for example.
Sure.
So I guess I'll just add just some comments. In my past, finding it, it's not something that usually stands out. In my experience, we found them on our plots, for example, in Shelby County, where you couldn't see it from the road. You barely can see it from the road now. I would say you would really have to get into the field. There's been instances at that R3 when the sprayer is going through, they've found it. A lot of times, in my experience, they've been finding it entryways, but Matt showed us spots that's not necessarily entryways. But I would say overall, this year, observations from many different agronomists are they're found in spots where the plants are stressed in some way. Compaction, planted too deep.
Kind of high moisture areas,
Yes.
draws in the field, those kind of things.
Yep.
Yeah. Thinking about the summer we've had over a lot of the Midwest, this very hot, humid for weeks and weeks and weeks on end until yesterday?
Yeah.
It's like it's finally broke. Is that affecting this in some ways too? I mean, are we going to see more red crown rot because of that? Or maybe if there's other diseases as well?
So in order to get those foliar symptoms, the intraveinal chlorosis on the diseases that we talked about, so red crown rot, brown stem rot, STS, you have to have a big rain. And that's what happens. We get a big rain, and we either start seeing soil-borne diseases, or it brings up that toxin, and that's actually what causes the foliar symptoms. So I think Boris might have pointed out at our training, you can still have a root rot. And he's still looking at, is it a seedling disease and how bad that is. So those are other things to look at. But you get that big rain, and then I don't know, in my opinion, where we started to really see symptoms is when the faucet shut off and the plants just started going down because they had no root system.
Right. And then they're stressed, to your point earlier.
I think that's important, that no root system idea. In some cases, and you guys can speak about this as well, in some cases, when it gets really severe, it really looks to me almost like a nubbed off post that you've just stuck in the ground. There's just nothing left for a
You
root
can
system.
just pull it out of the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah. And do you still see that red underground at that point, or is it all just dead?
Yeah, for a period of time, those red structures, I'd say by the time we get into September, you start missing those. It gets really hard to find them after we get. So there's a narrow period of time that you're spotting those structures that we were talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it turns black towards the end of the season.
Oh, yeah.
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 Wow.
Yeah. Boris, you said earlier you've been working on maybe a project to track red crown rot with remote sensing and some of that kind of thing. Can you share what you've learned there? Or how that's going?
So this is a disease that will get spread mainly through soil movement. So any machinery that you have with soil that is infected with these microsclerotia, these structures, will help to disperse the disease. So it's not an aerial-borne disease that will get spread that easily, right? So we have some counties in West Indiana that are infected, and then in Northeast. So we cannot explain what's going on there, how the disease got there. So our assumption is that the disease is much widespread than we think. We think, based on what we talk to persons, many fields has been diagnosed as sudden death syndrome, but it was actually red crown rot. So we need to map the disease. We need to know exactly where the disease is to be able to contain it before it gets spread to other fields, to new areas, and also within the fields, because this is very patchy. We need to map the disease within the field so we can keep it contained, those patches, and doesn't get spread throughout the field. So that is why we are using remote sensing, because basically satellite imagery can help us to process a lot of square kilometers of acres in a very short period of time, just from our computer. So we are working on a model, an AI model that can help us to process that satellite imagery and map where the disease is. So if it is planting season, we can alert the farmers there. You had a red crown rot in the past, you better think on a seed treatment, for example. And this is why we are trying to use AI and remote sensing.
And that is funded by Illinois Soybean Association, and he is mapping our field, unfortunately.
So you'll know more. And then I assume then you could target fungicide application, right, with that information?
Yeah, we don't have any foliar fungicide that can be applied. We don't have any, so far, we don't have any fungicide that can go from the leaves to the roots. All the fungicide will go from the roots to the leaves. So far we have just, I think in the market there is only 3 seed treatments that are labeled for red crown rot. But that is something that you need. So you need to know in advance if you will be dealing with a disease in the season, so you can plan those seed treatments and make your economic analysis to define if you want the seed treatment or not. But in season, there is no much that you can do other than just be aware of the disease and wash the equipment, the combine, the planters. If you have to plant a field that is infected with red crown rot, you can leave it until the end of the season planting, so you don't move the soil, the contaminated soil, to new fields.
Sure. So then the varieties that you're choosing are going to matter, and you guys are doing some varietal testing.
Right. Yeah. So again, the hope is, and maybe a little hint that maybe varietal tolerance will be part of managing this. And so what we're doing at Beck's is we're looking at 100 different varieties from 2.5 to 4.5 for maturity in 2 locations that we know have red crown rot, or at least have had a pretty good indication of red crown rot. And we're trying to go out there at least in some cases a couple times, in most of those cases multiple times, and track what's happening with that disease and see if we can come up with anything variety-wise that seems to kind of be better at warding off the disease, or maybe I should say kind of slowing its advance, because I think that's probably more what we're going to see, is not so much resistance as much as it's going to be just some kind of rate reducing effect of a variety. Yeah.
We've seen differences, we think, with varieties.
Yep.
We're just not there yet.
Yep.
Also difference in maturities perhaps, but I see differences in planting dates. And we've been able to see that because of the last couple soybean seasons we wouldn't normally have different planting dates, but because of the weather we have. So we've made those observations, and I just want to make another shout out for Boris and some ISA funded research. It's assumed, but we want to make sure that red crown rot can be associated with soybean cyst nematode. And that's not anything new. That's also true of brown stem rot and SDS, but it seems to be, for example, our home farm, it's a field. I went to the field where it's suspected that it had SCN, and that's where it showed up. So I think that is something we look forward to hearing more back from Boris and his research.
And it makes some sense, right? Wounding on the root tissue and opportunities for disease to enter more efficiently, those kind of things. You wonder if soybean cyst nematode, there wouldn't be some kind of relationship. And we probably should give a shout out as well that we're kind of in between plant pathologists, and this topic, Soybean Association in Illinois really pushed really hard that we need a plant pathologist because of this disease and other diseases, but we really need somebody to focus.
Yeah. Boris emailed me before he came to U of I, and he wanted to know, give a heads up on what he would work on, and I just told him that he had job security here.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, yes. Stephanie, you mentioned planting dates. Can you be more specific what you're seeing? Like what dates are better than others or less good?
So I guess I don't want to go too much into it.
Yeah.
So some of the literature from the South says that later planting dates might perhaps have worse red crown rot. And I think I'm just going to say anecdotally, like some observations that, for example, Matt and I have made, that's not necessarily true. I've seen red crown rot just as bad on early planted versus later planted. I think it's a matter of it might show up earlier on the earlier planted and then later on the later planted. Matt, would you agree?
It's hard for me at this moment when people have asked me if there is a planting date effect on red crown rot. I've seen it kind of cut both ways enough that I don't feel like we're there yet. And I think it's a good example, though. I mean, you talked about kind of anecdotal experience. That's really where we are when it comes to management for this thing, is just kind of our observations. 2018 isn't a long time to have done any real good in-field research. And so people are trying to collaborate, give people an idea of what they've been seeing, so we can come up with some kind of management principles or some kind of management ideas or thoughts on the disease.
Yeah.
I think in my area, for example, I think they're just now getting comfortable. and getting the awareness. And so that's why we keep finding it in our area. I mean, they keep showing me pictures of it. I think it's a matter, there's some people that don't want to talk about it. And so we're just kind of in that phase where you can't ignore it anymore. I think there's some people that have just tried to ignore it, and it just gets worse. So we're all over the place in different ways across the state.
Yeah, I think at the end it's correlated with the temperature and the humidity. So if you plant very early, the temperatures might be low for the pathogen to cause infections, but and as the disease progresses, the soil temperature will increase and will allow the infections. We favor the infections. But then if you plant late, you may have the right temperature, but then if you don't have the humidity, the pathogen will not infect. So at the end, it's a combination of both factors that will determine. But I think as a general rule based on research conducted by Dr. Carl Bradley at the University of Kentucky, planting late seems to be more associated with higher disease severity. And something interesting about the satellites is that we can check images from 2015 with the same resolution. So if we get a model that is able to see the disease, we can do all these kind of studies. We can revise planting dates with the previous season, and we can make a conclusion if planting date is important when determining the disease severity.
I was sitting here thinking, the farmer question maybe might be, when are we going to know what to do exactly? And that's the thing that, to your point, Matt, that takes years to figure out. And that we're not that far into it.
I mean, we're trying to do our best guesses. We kind of have some off-the-cuff recommendations, right? About, like Stephanie has very rightly mentioned that weed management probably important because it's a broad host range. We talk about reducing stress on stress, which sounds thin, but I mean, you don't want to take this pretty substantial disease and combine it with other stressors. We talk about people possibly doing corn, recognizing this can survive forever almost, I would say, for a long period of time in the field. And then we talk about some of the seed treatments that we have, which are great, but not good enough in front of intense pressure. So yeah, I think we're at the very beginning with kind of a list of ideas that we all kind of are brainstorming on at the moment.
Yeah, I always throw out the example. Unfortunately, when we found it on my neighbor's farm a year ago, Boris was there, and it was a dairy farm. And I hurried up and remembered, I was like, have you planted alfalfa here before? He said, yes, that's also a host. But it's not just legumes. There's other hosts, in other plant families. And so I think that's what kind of makes it a little scarier. But I think there's been a lot of different things and oddities I've heard farmers in Pike County talk about, where you can have it really, really bad in one field and the field next to it's perfectly fine. There's been a lot of questions like pH, which that can be associated with SEN, and then other questions about maybe, is it coming in on seed or from the trees even. And I know USDA, Dr. Clough has done some work looking at different varieties at U of I. Do you want to touch on that, Boris? Or?
You mean from the U of I program? Yeah, we have some conventional varieties from that program that are being tested against red crown rot, and then Steve Clough is more focused on trying to see some soybean lines, hundreds of soybean lines, to see if we have a source of resistance that can be incorporated in the commercial varieties.
They actually also tried to make sure that corn wasn't a host as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Thinking about comments about stress, right? Making plants more susceptible, and maybe rainfall followed by periods of, a drought or whatever. That's what we're seeing more and more, right? In the Midwest, is not this,
consistent.
We still get our 40 inches of rain. We're just getting it in a,
real patchy.
Right.
Yeah.
4 to 6 inches, nothing. 4 to 6 inches, nothing. Is that playing a role in some of this disease?
Well, Matt took
prevalence?
us to an area that looked pretty suspect, I'd say, last week.
Yeah, I undoubtedly environment plays a role. These guys will always talk about the disease triangle, right? You have to have the pathogen, the susceptible host, the right environment. And so right environment plays a role, and the stressors brought on by that right environment play a role. I don't know. Any other comments?
Like in that field you took us to last week, I mean, I worked for soil and water conservation. It was the way the water flowed. So you just speculate it could go with the water. Some say that I'm spreading it around, so now I'm wearing booties. Just make that clear and known.
Sure.
Yeah.
Since it's really, really hot in my area. And there's, I hate to say it, but a lot of dirt blowing around too.
Right. So it could be moving any number of ways that we just don't know.
Yeah, in particular, the soil movement component, and think about all the different ways that soil can move around. And
then you think of how many different rigs, sprayer rigs or
for sure
fertilizer trucks and that type of thing.
That's probably one thing on management. Again, we've kind of mentioned this in other venues, but I can't promise that by working a field last, you always eliminate the possibility of seeing this. But what you've mentioned, probably a field that has it bad, think about combining it last, maybe working that field last, if for no other reason, just to be able to put your head on the pillow easy at night,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What makes, thinking about Boris especially coming to the U.S. to really study this, what makes all of you decide in your life, I really want to study plant diseases? like what's the driving thing that got you into that and that gets you going every day?
Well, these guys are the real plant pathologists. I'm just a wannabe, and
you just play one on TV.
I just play. Yeah, I just play. No, I think for me, just in general, working in this field, I think most of us, this industry matters. We kind of believe in the industry and the mission of the industry. It is even though it's a business, it's a way of life that means something in here, and some way to be connected and help with it and serve other people. I'm suspecting you're going to hear some similar answers from these guys as well.
For sure.
Why did you choose to be a plant pathologist?
Well, I have to recognize that I started as a food scientist, working more on the mycotoxin world, in corn actually with aflatoxins, and then I switched to biocontrol because it was the only way that we had to keep the mycotoxins under control. And suddenly, and gradually, I was moving more to a plant pathology world. And I like applied research because we are solving problems. So problems that the farmers have, and this is why I moved to diseases, because it's a fascinating world. It's something that is sometimes you can see it with your eyes, but sometimes there is a hidden world there that you are not seeing with your eyes, that is happening at the molecular level. And so it's really fascinating to see how microorganisms can affect our crops and at the end our economy.
No, it was one of those classes I really, really liked. I loved microbiology, and really started learning about the history and just never knew like these big blights that happened and the potato famine.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, oh my gosh, now I get it. Like the first disease I knew was SDS on our own farm, and just started to apply it. And you start to realize just how important diseases are in crops and other foods and for food security. And we've seen in the last couple years that you can have some new diseases like tar spot and red crown rot just show up out of nowhere, and it's great job security.
Absolutely.
Fortunately.
I think that comment about out of nowhere is an important one, because, if you had talked to people 10 years ago, 12 years ago, and you'd asked them to project the diseases that would be the big players, I don't think somebody would have thought of red crown rot or tar spot. I mean, it's a really good testimony to why we need informed individuals in this space, because we really don't know what's coming our way, and you really want some really tuned in professionals ready to go when that new thing lands on your part of the world.
Right. And looking ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that you guys liked microbiology, because I took it and hated it. So this is why we have different people, right?
I had my own little microscope at home, and I have one now. So
that's amazing. I did come out of microbiome learning, always wash your hands.
There you go.
What kind of questions, just kind of to wrap this up, I'm curious, like, what are the questions that you guys are hearing most commonly from the farmers that you run into around red crown rot? Like, are they concerned enough? Are they, maybe underestimating it? Are they overly concerned? Like, what are they asking about it?
Yeah, I mean, as far as questions go, I mean, I think we've addressed a lot of it. How do you identify it? What's the yield loss? What things are you doing? Maybe the conversation that I get to have more with people is that conversation where we try to maintain that tension between you need to have respect and be informed, but we also don't need to panic, and we need to get it identified correctly. And I probably spend a lot of time in that space along with all the stuff that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, I would say it's all emotions all over the board. Some people are complacent, others are panicked, and some, I mean, if it doesn't happen to you, it's not a problem until it happens to them. And then it's kind of like, what do I do now? So it's all over the place depending where you are in the state. I hear things like, well, I was hoping it would stay south. I think that was a Chris Eeler comment.
It's fair.
I didn't know, like at one point, I think it was said that it couldn't go as far north, which I think it can. One of the things that's come up on social media is that you can do soil tests in some ways. And I don't know if you want to comment to that, but sometimes we question the accuracy of that.
Like genomic testing of the soil.
Genomic soil testing, that's a big topic now. And I would not, I think I would diagnose it based on plant symptoms more so, and not worry about those tests, because that's got people panicked as well.
All the time.
Yeah, but I think it's important for the farmers to know that at the university level, the industry level, we are doing everything that we can to find a solution to this problem. We are testing every product in the market, every practice, varieties, in-farm of fungicides, seed treatments. We are exploring interactions with other diseases. We are testing everything that we can. We have multiple field trials throughout the states, also in Kentucky, in Indiana. So we are doing our best trying to find a solution for this. And hopefully, in the short term, we can have some strategy to keep it under control.
Because we want people to plant soybeans.
Right. All right. Anything else, guys?
Well, thank you for the time and really good questions. And this is a really important topic. Like I said, something that people need to be informed about, and really glad that we could all sit down and visit about it.
Absolutely. All right. Boris, Stephanie, Matt, thanks so much. I hope everybody has a good day out here today and enjoy the cooler weather. And we'll see you next time, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.